The first thing Renee Walker noticed about the Whitmore house was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind that settled into your bones and let you rest. This quiet felt staged, like someone had pressed mute on a very expensive life. Even the air seemed careful as she stepped through the front door, as if it didn't want to disturb anything. Her duffel bag felt heavier than it should have as she held it close to her side. The foyer opened into a wide, glass-lined space overlooking Lake Washington. Gray water stretched out under an overcast sky, the surface barely rippling. Everything inside the house reflected something else. Light off polished floors, chrome off marble, money off restraint. Renee stood there for a moment, unsure where to place herself. She had worked in large homes before. Big houses came with their own rules. But this one felt different. Not lived in. Maintained. Ms. Walker? The voice pulled her back. A woman stood a few feet away, tablet tucked against her chest. Slim. Precise. Her expression polite but distant, like a receptionist trained not to remember names. I'm Judith, the woman said. Mr. Whitmore's assistant. Renee nodded. Nice to meet you. Judith turned and began walking immediately, assuming Renee would follow. She did. They moved through hallways that curved instead of turned. Past doors that were closed, some that were open just enough to reveal spaces too neat to belong to anyone. A sitting room with untouched cushions. A dining table that could seat 12, its surface bare. Dinner is at 6, Judith said without slowing. Breakfast is informal. Mr. Whitmore leaves early. Returns late. Renee absorbed the information quietly. This was familiar territory. Rules first. People later. They reached a narrow corridor tucked behind the main kitchen. Judith opened a door and gestured inside. This will be your room. It was small. A twin bed pressed against the wall. A dresser with one drawer slightly crooked. A window facing tall hedges trimmed into sharp lines. The hum of a washing machine vibrated faintly through the wall. Renee set her bag down. It's fine. Judith paused as if expecting more, then nodded. The child will be home around 4. The child? Renee repeated gently. Caleb. Judith's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Caleb. She hesitated at the doorway. He doesn't sleep well. Then she left. Renee exhaled slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. She rubbed her palms together, grounding herself, then began unpacking with methodical care. Shoes lined up. Clothes folded. A small photograph slipped into the top drawer. Her and Elijah years ago, laughing at something neither of them could remember now. At 4 sharp, the front door opened. Renee stepped into the hallway just as a boy walked in, backpack slung low, eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't look up. Didn't slow. Didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Hi, she said, keeping her voice light. You must be Caleb. Nothing. He kicked off his shoes without using his hands and walked past her, disappearing up the stairs. Renee stood there, the word hi still hanging uselessly in the air. She didn't follow. Dinner was quiet. Caleb sat across from her, poking at his food. He ate 3 bites and pushed the plate away. Renee noticed but didn't comment. She talked about neutral things. The weather. The way the lake looked like metal in the morning. He didn't respond, but he listened. She could tell by the way his fingers stilled when she spoke. At 6:30, Judith appeared briefly to clear plates. Thomas Whitmore never came down. Later, as Renee wiped the counter, she heard footsteps upstairs. Small. Careful. Back and forth. Like pacing. She paused, cloth in hand, listening. This wasn't just a job, she realized. It was something else. Something unfinished. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Renee stared at the ceiling and let the house breathe around her. Pipes clicking. Wind brushing the glass. A distant, almost cry that stopped as suddenly as it began. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from the agency. Everything okay so far? Renee didn't answer right away. If you're listening to this story and you want to stay with it, to hear how this quiet house starts to crack open, this might be a good moment to subscribe. Some stories don't reveal themselves all at once. They need time. Upstairs, a door creaked. Renee sat up in bed, heart ticking faster. Bare feet padded across the floor. Then came the sound that would change everything. A child's scream, sharp and raw, tearing straight through the silence. Morning came to the Whitmore house without warmth. Light slipped in through the glass walls in thin, colorless sheets, touching everything without settling anywhere. Renee woke before her alarm, the echo of the night's scream still lodged in her chest. For a few seconds she lay still listening. No crying. No footsteps. Just the distant hum of the house waking itself up. She dressed quietly and stepped into the staff kitchen. The counters were already spotless, as if someone had cleaned them in their sleep. A pot of coffee sat warming on the machine, untouched. Judith appeared exactly at 7. "Mr. Whitmore has already left," she said, checking her tablet. "Caleb will be down shortly." Renee nodded. "Is there a routine I should follow with him? Breakfast preferences? School drop-off?" Judith's fingers paused over the screen. "He eats what he eats," she said. "The driver handles school." Not helpful but honest. Caleb came down 10 minutes later, backpack already on. He poured himself cereal without looking at Renee and sat at the far end of the table. The bowl clinked softly as he ate, each movement careful, controlled. "Good morning," Renee said. He shrugged. "Not yes. Not no." She tried again. "I heard you like astronomy. There's a planetarium near here." His spoon stopped midair. For half a second she thought she'd reached him. Then he resumed eating. When the driver arrived, Caleb stood without a word and walked out. Renee watched from the doorway as he climbed into the car alone. The rest of the day unfolded in rules and boundaries. Judith showed Renee the cleaning schedule, which rooms were off-limits, which closets were locked. She spoke in clipped sentences, efficient and distant, like someone trained to avoid emotional entanglement. "Mr. Whitmore values privacy," Judith said, "especially regarding his son." "I understand," Renee replied. But understanding didn't mean agreement. That afternoon, Renee organized the pantry and noticed how little kid food there was. No snacks. No juice boxes. Everything measured. Adult. At 4 the car returned. Caleb came in quieter than before, shoulders slumped. He dropped his backpack and sat on the stairs, staring at nothing. "Rough day?" Renee asked from the kitchen. He didn't answer. She poured him a glass of water and set it on the step beside him. He waited a long moment before taking it. Dinner came and went with only the sound of utensils. Caleb barely touched his plate again. Later, Renee found him in the living room, standing inches from the glass wall, watching the lake darken. "Do you ever throw rocks in it?" she asked. He shook his head. "It makes circles," she said, "even when you can't see where they end." He glanced at her then, just briefly. His eyes were tired in a way no child should be. At 8, Renee gently suggested bedtime. Caleb climbed the stairs without protest. She was wiping down the counter when Judith appeared again, her voice lower this time. "If he wakes up, don't engage unless instructed." Renee turned. "Wakes up how?" "Bad dreams," Judith said. "Night wandering. Mr. Whitmore prefers to handle it." "When he's home," Renee said. Judith's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes." That night, the house seemed to hold its breath. Renee lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between distant sounds. A door opening, closing. Footsteps, soft but restless. She sat up. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Silence stretched. Then they moved away, slow and uncertain, heading upstairs. Renee waited. 5 seconds. 10. A small sound followed. Not a scream this time. A whimper. Like someone trying not to be heard. Renee swung her legs out of bed. She knew the rule. She also knew the sound. Her hand hovered over the doorknob as the whimper grew sharper, edged with fear. Some rules, she realized, were written by people who weren't there in the dark. She opened the door. Renee moved quietly up the stairs, keeping her steps light, her breathing even. The house felt different at night. Bigger. Hollowed out. Every sound echoed just a little too long, like it was waiting to be noticed. Caleb's bedroom door was half open. A thin strip of light spilled into the hallway, trembling as shadows moved inside. Renee paused at the threshold, listening. The whimper had stopped, replaced by uneven breathing. Too fast. Too shallow. She knocked softly. "Caleb?" No answer. She pushed the door open an inch. "It's Renee." Caleb was sitting up in bed, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. His hands were clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. "She was here," he whispered. Renee followed his gaze. Nothing but a bookshelf and a framed picture of a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. His mother. "She called my name," he said. "But I couldn't see her." Renee stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. She didn't rush to the bed. She remembered being small, remembered how adults always moved too fast when you were scared. "I don't hear her," Renee said calmly. "But I hear you." Caleb swallowed. "Dad doesn't." The words landed heavier than any scream. Renee sat on the edge of the bed, keeping space between them. "He's not very good at knowing when you need him," she said carefully. "That doesn't mean you don't matter." Caleb's lip trembled. He turned his face away, embarrassed by the tears that escaped anyway. "She used to sit with me," he said. "On the floor. Right there." He pointed beside the bed. Renee followed the line of his finger. The carpet was slightly worn in that spot, pressed flat by years of weight. A place someone had stayed. Without making a show of it, Renee slid down onto the floor. She leaned her back against the bed frame, knees bent, hands resting loosely in her lap. "I can sit here," she said. "Just for a little while." Caleb watched her carefully as if waiting for the catch. "You don't have to." "I know." The room settled. Renee could hear the faint sound of the lake outside, water brushing against the shore. The house creaked softly, like it was adjusting to the truth of them being there. After a few minutes, Caleb's breathing slowed. "Do you sleep on the floor at your house?" he asked. Renee smiled to herself. "No. But I've slept on worse." "Like where?" She considered. "Once in a bus station. The floor was sticky." That earned a small, surprised snort. He covered his mouth, then peeked at her. "My dad doesn't like jokes," Caleb said. "I like them enough for both of us," Renee replied. Silence again, but this time it was different. Not sharp. Softer around the edges. Caleb lay back, eyes half-lidded. His hand dangled over the side of the bed, fingers twitching as if searching for something. Renee noticed but didn't move. Eventually, his fingers brushed the sleeve of her sweater. He froze. Renee stayed still. Slowly he let his hand rest there. She stayed until his breathing evened out completely. Until the tension drained from his small frame and sleep finally claimed him. Renee didn't sleep much herself. The floor was hard, the air cool. But she didn't mind. She watched the shadows on the wall and thought about rules. About assistants with tablets. About a father who wasn't there when his son cried. When she finally stood to leave, she paused, looking at Caleb one more time. "This doesn't mean I'm your mom," she whispered, not sure who she was saying it for. "But you don't have to be alone tonight." She slipped out and returned to her room. The next morning, Caleb ate half his breakfast. It wasn't much, but Renee noticed. He didn't talk, but he stayed at the table longer. When the driver arrived, he hesitated at the door, then turned back. Are you going to be here tonight?" he asked, eyes fixed on the floor. Renee nodded. "I am." He nodded once and left. That afternoon, Judith cornered Renee near the laundry room. "I noticed you were upstairs late," she said, voice low. "That won't be necessary." Renee met her gaze. "He needed someone." Judith's expression hardened. "Mr. Whitmore has very specific expectations." "So does his son," Renee replied quietly. Judith stared at her for a long moment, then turned away without another word. That evening, Thomas Whitmore came home early. Renee heard his footsteps in the foyer, the unfamiliar sound of someone actually using the space. She stayed in the kitchen, stirring a pot she didn't need to stir, listening as he called Caleb's name. "Hey buddy. How was school?" Caleb's voice floated down, cautious. "Okay." Renee held her breath. She knew this couldn't stay hidden forever. And somewhere deep in the house, as night began to settle in again, the floor beside Caleb's bed waited. The days that followed slipped into a quiet pattern. one that looked orderly from the outside and felt fragile up close. Thomas Whitmore began coming home earlier, though early still meant after dark. His presence changed the temperature of the house. The lights stayed on longer. Doors closed more deliberately. Conversations felt careful, like everyone was choosing their words from a limited set. Renee noticed the way Caleb listened for his father's footsteps. The way his shoulders lifted when Thomas spoke, then slowly fell when the conversation ended too soon. At dinner, Thomas sat at the head of the table, phone face down beside his plate. He asked questions. Real ones. About school. About math tests and recess and what book Caleb was reading. Caleb answered in short bursts, never quite meeting his eyes. Renee stayed mostly quiet, serving, clearing, moving in and out of the room like a ghost with a pulse. She could feel Thomas watching her sometimes, not openly but with the same awareness you have of a ticking clock. He had noticed something had shifted. He just didn't know what yet. That night, Renee waited in her room listening. She told herself she would stay there unless Caleb called for her. Judith's voice echoed in her head. Don't engage unless instructed. The clock ticked past 9. Then 10. Footsteps sounded upstairs. What? Hesitant. Renee sat up in bed. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Caleb standing there in socks, pajama sleeves pulled over his hands. Dad's here, he said quietly, like that should have solved everything. Renee knelt so they were eye level. Does that make it easier? He shook his head. Do you want me to walk you back? She asked. He nodded. They moved down the hallway together. Thomas's voice drifted up from the living room, low and steady, talking to someone on the phone. Business. Always business. Caleb paused outside his bedroom, eyes flicking toward the stairs. He's busy, he whispered. Renee didn't contradict him. She opened the bedroom door instead. Caleb climbed into bed without turning on the light. Renee stayed standing for a moment, unsure. You can sit, he said, barely audible. If you want. She lowered herself to the floor. The night passed quietly, but sleep didn't come easily. Caleb shifted often. Renee felt every movement through the frame of the bed, like a shared nervous system. In the morning, Thomas asked Renee to join him briefly in the kitchen. I noticed Caleb's been calmer, he said, folding his sleeves up with unnecessary precision. Sleeping better. Renee kept her face neutral. I'm glad. He studied her. Have you been doing something different? She chose her words carefully. I listen. Thomas nodded slowly as if filing that away for later. Over the next week, the pattern held. Caleb ate a little more. Slept a little longer. He still didn't talk much, but sometimes he sat closer to Renee at the table. Sometimes he asked her questions about ordinary things. Where she learned to cook. Whether she liked the rain. She had siblings. One brother, she said once. Older. Where is he? Renee paused. Not close by. Caleb accepted that answer the way children do when they sense the edge of something sharp. Thomas tried in his own way. He canceled one meeting to attend a school conference. He read Caleb a chapter of a book, stumbling over character voices but pushing through. Some nights he sat on the edge of the bed, stiff and unsure. Renee stayed out of sight during those moments. She listened from the hallway, heart tight, knowing she was both helping and complicating things. One night after Thomas left the room, Caleb's door opened again. Renee was already standing. She didn't say a word. She just went in and sat on the floor. Later, as she lay there staring at the ceiling, she wondered how long this could last. How long before someone named it? How long before the quiet broke? The answer came sooner than she expected. The next afternoon, as Renee waited outside the school gates, she felt a presence beside her. A woman she didn't recognize, dressed too sharply for pickup duty, eyes scanning Renee's face with intent. Renee Walker? The woman asked. Renee's stomach tightened. Yes, she said slowly. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We need to talk. About your brother. The bell rang. Children poured out. And Renee knew in that instant that the careful balance she'd built inside the Whitmore house was about to collapse. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words landed with quiet precision, cutting through the noise of children spilling out of the school like a blade through fabric. Renee felt the air thicken around her. For a moment she forgot where she was. "Your brother," the woman repeated, watching Renee's face closely. "Elijah Walker." Renee forced herself to breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman smiled slightly as if she'd expected that. "My name is Denise Holloway. I represent families affected by the Kestrel chemical spill in Fulton County." The name hit like a shove to the chest. Renee's hands curled into fists inside her coat pockets. "You have the wrong person." "I don't," Denise said calmly. "Elijah Walker worked at the plant. He was there the night the containment failed." Renee's vision blurred at the edges. She glanced toward the school doors, panic tightening her throat. "This isn't the place." Denise followed her gaze. "We've tried calling, writing. You stopped responding." "That was on purpose," Renee snapped, then immediately softened her tone as a teacher passed nearby. "Please, not here." Denise studied her for a long second, then nodded. "I'll be in touch again. Soon." She stepped back into the crowd and disappeared as easily as she'd arrived. Renee stood frozen until she spotted Caleb weaving through the other children, backpack bouncing against his side. He looked up, searching. When he saw her, relief flickered across his face. "You're here?" he said. "Of course I am," Renee replied, forcing a smile. "Ready to go?" He nodded, but he kept glancing behind her like he sensed something was off. The ride home was quiet. Caleb watched the rain streak down the window while Renee stared straight ahead, her mind pulled backward through years she had carefully packed away. The hospital room. The paperwork. The silence that followed when the world moved on without her brother in it. Back at the house, Renee moved through her tasks on autopilot. She folded laundry that was already folded. She wiped counters that were already clean. Her hands shook just enough to notice. Caleb hovered nearby. "Are you mad?" he asked suddenly. Renee looked down at him. "At you?" "Never." "At something," he said. "You look like when people are trying not to cry." The honesty of it cracked something open in her. She crouched in front of him. "Sometimes grown-ups have things from before," she said. "Things that come back when we're not ready." "Like bad dreams?" Caleb offered. "Yes," she said quietly. "Like that." Dinner came and went. Thomas arrived late, distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. Renee avoided his eyes. She didn't trust herself to meet them. That night she didn't go upstairs right away. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, listening to the house settle. The past pressed in from all sides. She told herself she could leave. She should leave. This job had always been temporary. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She already knew who it was. Caleb stood there, pajama sleeves pulled over his hands again, eyes uncertain. "Can you?" he began, then stopped. Renee stood. "Let's go." They walked upstairs together. Thomas's door was closed. Light glowed faintly beneath it. Caleb hesitated at his bedroom doorway. "Dad's home," he said. "I know," Renee replied. "He said he'd come if I needed him." Renee swallowed. "Do you want to try?" Caleb thought about it, then shook his head. "Not yet." Renee said nothing. She sat on the floor where she always did. The room felt heavier tonight. Caleb tossed and turned, muttering under his breath. Renee stared at the ceiling, replaying Denise's words again and again. Kestrel Chemical. A boardroom name. A line item. A decision made far away from the people it crushed. At some point, Caleb reached down and grabbed her sleeve. "Don't go," he whispered, half asleep. "I'm here," Renee murmured. She didn't sleep at all. Sometime after midnight, the bedroom door opened. Renee didn't look at first. She knew the weight of those footsteps. Slower. Heavier. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, framed by the hall light. His eyes moved from his sleeping son to Renee on the floor, the thin blanket pulled around her shoulders. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas said quietly, "What are you doing?" Renee sat up, heart hammering. Before she could answer, Caleb stirred, his fingers tightening reflexively around her sleeve. And Thomas saw that too. Thomas didn't raise his voice. That was what made it worse. His tone was low, controlled, the same one he probably used in boardrooms when numbers didn't line up and someone had to explain themselves. He stepped fully into the room, careful not to wake Caleb, and closed the door behind him with deliberate quiet. Renee pushed herself upright, blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her legs were stiff from the floor. Her heart wasn't. "He had a bad dream," she said softly. Thomas looked at his son. Caleb's face was still creased with sleep, brow faintly furrowed, fingers wrapped tightly around Renee's sleeve as if letting go might pull him under. "You're sleeping on the floor," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Renee nodded. "When he needs me." "How long has this been happening?" She hesitated. "A while." Thomas's jaw tightened. He glanced at the bed. The open space beside it. The worn patch of carpet where Renee now sat. "There are guest rooms," he said. "There's no reason for you to." "He doesn't want a bed," Renee interrupted quietly. Then, just as quietly, "He wants someone to stay." The words hung between them. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the movement sharp with frustration. "You should have told me." "I didn't want to make it a thing," Renee replied. "He didn't either." "That doesn't make it appropriate," Thomas said. Renee met his eyes. "What's appropriate is him sleeping through the night." For a moment it looked like he might argue. Then Caleb shifted, a small sound escaping his throat. Renee instinctively stilled, lowering her voice even more. "He wakes up thinking his mom can't find him," she continued. "He calls out. He waits. When no one comes, he thinks that means something." Thomas's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. "He never said that," he murmured. "He wouldn't," Renee said. "He thinks you're busy." Thomas looked away toward the window, the dark lake reflecting back a faint outline of the room. "I am busy." "I know," she said. "But he doesn't understand that." Silence stretched. Finally Thomas sighed. It sounded tired. Older than he looked. "You should have woken me." Renee chose honesty over comfort. "He asked me not to." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "I'm not trying to replace you," Renee added. "I'm just here." Caleb stirred again, eyes fluttering open. "Dad?" he mumbled. Thomas moved to the bed immediately. "Hey buddy. I'm here." Caleb's gaze flicked to Renee on the floor. His grip tightened. Thomas noticed. "You okay?" Thomas asked him. Caleb nodded, then shook his head. "Renee stays." Thomas swallowed. "I can stay too." Caleb considered this, then turned his face slightly toward Renee. "She doesn't leave." The words weren't an accusation. They were a statement of fact. Thomas straightened slowly. "I won't take her away from you," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But this can't be the long-term solution." Renee said nothing. Neither did Caleb. Eventually, Thomas pulled a chair closer and sat, stiff-backed, hands folded like he was waiting for instructions. He stayed longer than Renee expected. Long enough for Caleb's breathing to even out again. When Thomas finally stood, he paused beside Renee. "We'll talk in the morning," he said quietly. She nodded. He left the room without another word. Renee stayed where she was. The floor felt colder now. Heavier. Not because of discomfort, but because something had shifted. This wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, breakfast was tense. Thomas drank his coffee standing up, eyes scanning emails on his phone. Caleb ate silently. Renee moved between them, aware of every sound, every glance. "I'll be home tonight," Thomas said suddenly. "Earlier." Caleb looked up, surprised. Renee didn't. All day the house felt like it was waiting. That afternoon, Judith cornered Renee near the pantry. "You didn't follow protocol," she said sharply. Renee met her gaze. "I followed the child." Judith's eyes flicked toward the stairs. "Mr. Whitmore does not like boundaries crossed." Renee's voice stayed calm. "Then he should come home when his son cries." Judith's lips parted, then pressed together. She turned away without responding. That night, Thomas did come home early. Renee heard him moving upstairs. Heard the door to Caleb's room open. She stayed downstairs, hands clenched around a dish towel, heart pounding. She didn't know what he would do. And for the first time since she arrived at the Whitmore house, she wasn't sure where she stood anymore. The house settled into a strange truce. It wasn't peace. It was something quieter and more fragile, like everyone had agreed not to touch the same sore spot at the same time. Thomas came home earlier most nights, his briefcase set down with less force, his phone silenced more often. He didn't say why. He didn't explain. He just showed up. Caleb noticed everything. He watched the clock. He listened for the garage. He counted how many minutes his father stayed in one place before moving on to the next thing. Some nights, Thomas read to him. Other nights, he sat on the edge of the bed and talked about his day in vague, harmless pieces. Meetings, travel, plans that didn't quite land. Renee stayed in the background during those moments. She wiped counters that didn't need wiping. She folded laundry slowly. She gave Thomas space to try. Some nights it worked. Other nights it didn't. On the nights it didn't, Caleb's door opened again after the lights went out. His steps were quieter now, more practiced. He didn't knock anymore. He just stood in Renee's doorway waiting. She never made him ask. They would walk upstairs together, their movements synced, like this had always been the plan. Renee would sit on the floor. Caleb would lie down. The house would breathe again. No one talked about it. Not Thomas. Not Judith. Not Renee. But the silence around it grew louder. One evening, as Renee helped Caleb with homework, he asked a question without looking up. Why doesn't Dad sleep on the floor? Renee paused, pencil hovering over the page. Most adults don't think to, she said carefully. Mom did, he replied. Renee felt the weight of that land between them. Your mom understood you, she said. Your dad's still learning. Caleb nodded, accepting that in the way children accept incomplete truths. Later that night, Thomas lingered in the hallway after saying goodnight. Renee stood a few feet away, hands folded, unsure if she was meant to leave. He talks to you more, Thomas said quietly. Renee didn't pretend not to know who he meant. He feels safe. Thomas looked at the floor, then back up. I should be the one he feels safe with. You can be, Renee said. It just takes time. His mouth tightened. I don't have much of that. You do, she replied gently. You're just used to spending it elsewhere. The words surprised them both. Thomas didn't get angry. He nodded once, as if acknowledging something he'd been avoiding. Good night, Renee. Good night, she said. That night, Caleb slept without waking. Renee lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps that never came. Relief and unease tangled in her chest. She didn't want to be needed like this forever. She just wanted him to be okay. The next morning, Judith handed Renee a revised schedule. Mr. Whitmore wants more structure, she said. Consistent bedtime. Fewer variables. Renee scanned the page. Her name appeared less often upstairs. Is this coming from him? Renee asked. Judith's pause was answer enough. He's trying to reclaim his role. Renee folded the paper. I hope it works. So do I, Judith said, though her tone suggested uncertainty. For 3 nights it did. Thomas stayed until Caleb fell asleep. He read. He sat. He tried not to check his phone. Renee stayed downstairs, listening to the muffled rhythm of their voices, her heart tight with something that felt like pride and loss all at once. On the 4th night, Thomas was late. Not late like before. Later. Caleb waited in bed, eyes fixed on the door. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Renee stood in the hallway, unsure. He said he'd come, Caleb whispered. I know, she replied. At 30 minutes, Caleb's breathing changed. His fingers twisted in the blanket. His eyes darted to the shadows. Renee hesitated only a second before sitting on the floor. Caleb didn't comment. He just lay down and turned toward the wall. When Thomas finally arrived, the sight stopped him cold. Renee on the floor again. Caleb already asleep. The routine re-established without him. He didn't speak. He watched for a long moment, something dark and complicated crossing his face. Then he turned and walked away. The next morning, Renee found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Her name was written on the front in Thomas's precise handwriting. Inside was a single sentence typed. Asterisk, we need to talk. Tonight, asterisk. Renee stared at the words, a familiar unease settling in her stomach. Because whatever unspoken agreement had held them together was starting to crack. And this time she wasn't sure who would fall through first. Renee spent the day moving through the house like she was carrying something fragile in her chest. The envelope stayed where she'd found it, tucked into the pocket of her sweater, the paper growing warm against her skin. Asterisk, we need to talk. Tonight. Asterisk, no explanation. No tone. Just certainty. She cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning. She reorganized cabinets already arranged with mathematical precision. Anything to keep her hands busy and her thoughts from running ahead of her. Caleb noticed. He followed her into the laundry room, sat on the counter while she folded towels. Are you in trouble? He asked. Renee smiled softly. Why would I be in trouble? Adults only say, we need to talk, when someone's in trouble, he said matter-of-factly. She paused, then folded the towel a little more slowly. Sometimes it just means something important needs to be said. Are you leaving? He asked. The question landed without warning, direct and unguarded. Renee looked at him. Really looked. His legs didn't quite reach the edge of the counter. His face was too serious for his age. I'm here today, she said carefully. That's what matters right now. He accepted that answer, but the worry didn't fully leave his eyes. Thomas came home before 6. Renee heard the garage door close, the solid finality of it. Footsteps followed, heavier than usual. He didn't call out. Didn't go upstairs. He went straight to the kitchen. Renee wiped her hands on a towel and followed. Thomas stood by the counter, jacket still on, staring at the window as if the lake might offer guidance. When he turned, his expression was controlled, but there was tension beneath it. Like something pulled too tight. Sit, he said. She did. I don't want this to feel like an interrogation, he began. Renee waited. But I need clarity, he continued. Because what's happening upstairs isn't sustainable. She nodded. I know. He studied her face, searching for something. How long has Caleb been asking you to stay? Renee answered honestly. Since the first night he woke up screaming. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. And you didn't think to tell me. He asked me not to, she said. And because I didn't think you'd hear it. His jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that for me. I didn't decide, Renee replied quietly. I responded. Silence stretched. Thomas exhaled slowly. Do you know how it looks? Renee met his gaze. Yes. A member of my staff sleeping on the floor of my son's bedroom, he said. Crossing boundaries. Creating dependencies. Or meeting a need that wasn't being met, she countered. His eyes flicked away. That's exactly the problem. The conversation stalled there, balanced on the edge of something sharper. Finally, Thomas spoke again. I'm grateful for what you've done. Truly. Renee didn't respond. But gratitude doesn't erase responsibility, he continued. To my son. To you. To the structure of this house. Renee felt the weight of that settle in. So what are you saying? I'm saying things need to change, Thomas said. Caleb needs consistency. From me. And if he doesn't want that consistency yet? She asked. Thomas's voice hardened just a little. Then he learns. Renee stood slowly. He's not a lesson. He looked at her sharply. Neither are you. They stared at each other, the air between them tight. Dinner's ready, Renee said finally, breaking the moment. Caleb will be hungry. The meal passed quietly. Too quietly. Caleb sensed the tension immediately, his movements careful, his eyes darting between them. He ate slowly like he was afraid of finishing. Afterward, Thomas insisted on putting Caleb to bed himself. Renee stayed downstairs, her hands clenched in her lap, listening. At first it sounded okay. Thomas's voice, low and steady. Pages turning. A pause, then more words. Then came the silence. Long, heavy. Renee stood. She didn't go upstairs right away. She waited, heart pounding, listening for the sound she'd come to recognize too well. It came softly this time. A sharp intake of breath. A muffled sob. Renee took the stairs 2 at a time. Caleb's door was open. The light was on. Thomas stood near the bed, frozen, his hands at his sides. Caleb was sitting up, face wet with tears, his gaze locked on Renee as if she were the only solid thing in the room. "You said you'd stay," Caleb whispered. "You always leave." Something in Thomas's face broke. Renee stepped forward without thinking, then stopped. Thomas looked at her, eyes dark, conflicted. "This is exactly what I mean," he said quietly. Renee didn't answer. Caleb reached out, fingers trembling, searching for her sleeve. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the Whitmore house, Renee didn't know if she was allowed to take his hand. Renee stood frozen in the doorway, caught between instinct and permission. Caleb's hand hovered in the air, small fingers shaking as if the effort alone was exhausting. His eyes were wide, glassy with fear, fixed on her like she was the last familiar thing in a room that had suddenly turned strange. Thomas noticed the hesitation. It cut deeper than if she'd rushed in. "Caleb," he said carefully, forcing calm into his voice. "I'm here." Caleb shook his head, tears spilling freely now. "You don't hear me," he said. "You never hear me." The words didn't come out loud. They came out thin, worn down by repetition. Thomas took a step forward, then stopped, unsure. He looked at Renee again, frustration flickering beneath something else. "Shame, maybe?" "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Sit." Renee didn't move at first. Then she crossed the room and lowered herself to the floor beside the bed, slower than usual, careful not to make it feel like a victory or a defeat. Caleb's hand dropped immediately into her sleeve, gripping tight like he'd been holding his breath until now. His sobs softened. Thomas watched the transformation with a mixture of relief and pain that twisted his chest. "I didn't know," he said after a moment, more to himself than to either of them. Renee kept her eyes on the floor. "He didn't think it would matter." "That's not true," Thomas replied quickly. Then he stopped. The word true felt slippery. Caleb shifted, turning his face toward the wall, but his grip on Renee didn't loosen. "When Mom died," he said quietly, "you got really quiet." Thomas flinched. "You stopped coming in," Caleb continued. "I thought if I was quiet too, you wouldn't leave again." The room seemed to shrink around them. Thomas sat down on the edge of the bed, his posture stiff, his hands folded together like he was holding himself in place. "I didn't know how to be in there anymore," he admitted. "Everything reminded me of her." Caleb sniffed. "She stayed anyway." Silence followed. Heavy. Necessary. Renee felt Caleb's breathing even out slowly, his body relaxing against the mattress. She stayed still, letting the moment unfold without inserting herself. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. "I thought providing was enough," he said quietly. "Keeping things running. Making sure nothing fell apart." "But things did," Caleb murmured, already half asleep. Thomas nodded. "I see that now." He stayed longer than he ever had before. Not reading. Not talking. Just sitting. Watching his son sleep. Watching Renee on the floor, the space she occupied without claiming it. When he finally stood, he didn't ask Renee to leave. "Stay," he said instead. "Tonight." She looked up at him, surprised. "Not because I'm okay with it," he added, "but because he is." Renee nodded once. Thomas left the room quietly. Renee stayed on the floor, staring at the underside of the bed, her thoughts louder than the house around her. Something had shifted again. Not resolved. Exposed. In the morning, Thomas was waiting in the kitchen when Renee came down. Caleb was already gone, the driver having taken him to school early. Judith stood near the counter, tablet in hand, pretending not to listen. "I want to apologize," Thomas said. Renee stopped. "For what?" "For putting you in a position you shouldn't have been in," he replied. "For not asking questions sooner." She folded her arms loosely. "I made my own choices." "Yes," he said. "But I benefited from them." Judith glanced up sharply, then back down. "I don't want Caleb depending on you because I'm absent," Thomas continued. "But I don't want him afraid either." Renee studied him. "Then don't make this about me." Thomas nodded slowly. "Fair." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like you to stay. For now. But with clearer boundaries." Renee considered that. Boundaries only work if everyone shows up. Thomas met her gaze. I'm trying. Later that afternoon, Renee waited at the school gate again. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. Parents gathered in loose clusters, voices overlapping. She almost missed the woman standing a few steps away watching her. Almost. Denise Holloway didn't smile this time. I told you I'd be in touch, she said quietly. Renee's chest tightened. This isn't the place. It's the only place I could be sure you'd stop, Denise replied. You work for Thomas Whitmore, don't you? Renee didn't answer. Denise nodded, confirmation enough. Then you need to know something. She leaned in slightly, lowered her voice. He knew about the spill long before it happened. Renee's breath caught. What? She whispered. Denise straightened as the school doors opened. Ask him. Caleb's face appeared in the crowd, scanning for Renee. Denise stepped back. We're not done, she said. Not even close. She disappeared just as Caleb reached Renee's side. Renee smiled automatically, but her hands were cold. Because suddenly the floor she'd been sleeping on felt a lot less stable. And tonight she knew she wouldn't be able to stay quiet anymore. Renee barely spoke during the drive home. Caleb filled the space instead, talking about a science project and how his teacher had let him sit by the window again. Renee nodded at the right places, smiled when he smiled, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Denise's words kept replaying, each time landing heavier. He knew about the spill long before it happened. The Whitmore house came into view, all glass and symmetry, looking exactly the same as it had every day since she arrived. That unsettled her more than anything. She wanted it to look different, to feel different. Inside, Caleb dropped his backpack and headed for the kitchen. Dad said he's home tonight, he said, hopeful. He promised. Renee's stomach tightened. That's good, she said, even as something in her chest braced for impact. Thomas did come home on time. Renee heard him before she saw him, his footsteps steady, unhurried. He looked tired when he entered the kitchen, but present in a way that felt intentional. He loosened his tie, set his phone face down, and smiled at Caleb. Hey, champ. Caleb brightened immediately. You're really home. I am, Thomas said. No calls. No meetings. They ate together. Thomas asked questions. He laughed once, an awkward sound like he didn't use it often. Renee watched from the sink, her hands submerged in warm water she didn't feel. After dinner, Thomas announced bedtime himself. I'll take it from here, he said to Renee, not dismissive, just firm. Renee nodded. I'll be downstairs. Caleb hesitated. He looked at Renee, then at his father. You're staying, right? I'm not leaving the house, Renee said carefully. Caleb nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. Renee stayed in the living room, folding laundry she'd already folded once. She listened. At first, everything sounded fine. Thomas reading, his voice uneven but trying. Caleb interrupting with questions. A shared laugh when Thomas stumbled over a word. Then the laughter stopped. The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was tight. Stretched. Renee froze, a shirt clenched in her hands. She heard Thomas speak again, lower this time. She couldn't make out the words. Then Caleb's voice, small and sharp. You said you wouldn't leave. I'm not leaving, Thomas replied, but there was strain there now. I just need you to sleep. I can't, Caleb said. Not like this. Renee stood. She didn't move yet. She waited, giving Thomas the chance he deserved. Minutes passed. Then came the sound she'd hoped not to hear. Not a scream. Something worse. A quiet, broken sob. Renee took the stairs slowly this time. She didn't want to rush in and make it worse. She reached the doorway and stopped. Thomas was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. Caleb lay curled against the wall, eyes open, tears sliding silently into his pillow. Renee didn't step inside. Thomas looked up. Their eyes met. For a second, neither of them moved. I'm failing him, Thomas said quietly. Renee shook her head. You're trying. It's not enough, he replied. He doesn't trust that I'll stay. Renee glanced at Caleb. His gaze flicked toward her, then away as if he didn't want to admit what he needed. Thomas followed the look. "Do you want her to stay?" Thomas asked his son. Caleb nodded. "Just once." Thomas swallowed hard. "Okay," he said. "She can stay." Renee stepped in and sat on the floor. Caleb relaxed almost instantly, his breathing slowing as his fingers reached for her sleeve. Thomas watched it happen, something dark passing across his face. Not anger. Loss. "I don't want this to be permanent," Thomas said quietly. Renee didn't argue. "Neither do I." She meant it. Later, after Caleb fell asleep, Thomas stayed in the doorway. "You could have undermined me," he said. "You didn't." "I don't want to replace you," Renee replied. "I want him to feel safe enough that he doesn't need me like this." Thomas nodded slowly. "I don't know how to get there." Renee hesitated. Denise's voice echoed in her head. "Ask him." "There are things," she began carefully, "that don't fix themselves just because you show up now." Thomas studied her. "Is that about Caleb, or about me?" Renee didn't answer. The next morning, she woke with a decision already forming. She found Thomas in the kitchen pouring coffee. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "About last night?" "About something else," Renee replied. "Something that happened before I came here." Thomas set the mug down slowly. "Okay." Her phone buzzed in her pocket before she could continue. A message from an unknown number. "You don't have much time," it read. "The truth always surfaces." Renee's hand tightened around the phone. She looked up at Thomas, at the man trying to learn how to stay, at the house that still didn't quite breathe. And she wondered what would break first when the truth finally came out. Renee didn't tell Thomas about the message right away. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and focused on the sound of the coffee machine finishing its cycle. The normalcy of it felt almost insulting. Steam hissed. A mug clinked softly against the counter. Outside, the morning looked clean and ordinary. Thomas watched her longer than necessary. "You said we needed to talk." "I did," Renee said. She pulled out a chair and sat, grounding herself in the feel of the wood beneath her hands. "But it's not a conversation you have standing up." He sat across from her, posture alert now, like a man used to negotiations more than confessions. Renee chose her words carefully. "Before I came here, I worked for a cleaning company contracted through one of your subsidiaries. Not this house. Another property." Thomas frowned slightly. "Okay. There was an incident," she continued. "A chemical spill at one of the facilities. I was there the morning after." Thomas didn't react. Not visibly. But something in his eyes sharpened. "It wasn't public yet," Renee said. "But people were already sick. Rashes. Breathing problems. One man collapsed while I was mopping the hallway." Silence stretched between them. "I was told to keep working," she said. "We all were. No protective gear. No warnings." Thomas leaned back slowly. "That spill was reported as contained within hours." "That's not what I saw," Renee replied. "And it's not what the people there experienced." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Who told you this?" Renee hesitated. "Someone who lost their sister." "That did it?" Thomas stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. He walked to the window, stared out at the driveway like he expected something to be waiting there. "That situation was handled by compliance," he said. "By legal. I wasn't directly." "You knew," Renee said quietly. He turned back to her. "I knew there was a risk," he admitted. "I was told it was minimal." Renee didn't raise her voice. "And when did you find out it wasn't?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it again. The answer sat heavy in the air between them. "I didn't think it would get this far," he said finally. "I didn't think people like you would still be dealing with it." Renee stood. "People like me were always the ones dealing with it." They stared at each other, the distance between them no longer measured in feet. "I didn't come here to expose you," Renee said. "I came because I needed work. Stability. A place where my son—" She stopped herself. Took a breath. "Where I could breathe." Thomas rubbed his temples. "Why tell me now?" "Because someone else already knows," Renee replied. And they're not interested in protecting anyone. As if summoned, the doorbell rang. They both froze. Thomas checked the security panel. No appointment. The bell rang again, more insistent. I'll handle it, Thomas said, but Renee was already moving. She reached the door first. A man stood on the porch this time. Mid-40s. Clean cut. A folder tucked under his arm. Miss Carter? He asked. Renee's stomach dropped. That was her name. One she rarely heard spoken by strangers. Yes, she said cautiously. I'm with the Provincial Labor Board, he said, holding up identification. We'd like to ask you some questions about a facility you worked at last year. Thomas appeared behind her. This is private property. The man nodded politely. I'm aware. We can schedule something later if that's preferable. Renee felt Thomas's presence behind her, solid and uncertain. Now is fine, she said. The investigator's gaze flicked to Thomas, then back to Renee. You might want legal representation. Thomas's voice was low. She won't be speaking without counsel. Renee turned to him. I didn't ask you to protect me. I know, Thomas replied. But I'm not letting you walk into this alone. Something unspoken passed between them. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. They sat in the study, the investigator taking notes, asking careful questions. Renee answered honestly, stopping when Thomas's attorney joined the call. Through it all, Renee felt watched. Like something larger was moving beneath the surface. When the investigator finally left, the house felt emptier than before. Thomas loosened his tie again, slower this time. This is going to get complicated. Renee nodded. It already is. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Asterisk, they're circling now. Decide which side you're on. Asterisk. Renee looked at Thomas, at the man whose son trusted her more than he trusted anyone else. She wondered how much truth a house like this could hold before it cracked, and whether staying silent had ever really been an option at all. The days that followed moved differently. Not slower. Heavier. Thomas's lawyers took over parts of the house the way storms take over a sky. Quiet phone calls. Doors closed for just a moment that stretched into hours. Renee learned to recognize the tone of voices that meant something bad had surfaced, even if no one said it out loud. Caleb noticed too. He started asking questions he hadn't asked before. Not directly. Sideways. Why are there so many people here? He asked one afternoon as Renee helped him with homework at the kitchen island. Your dad has work things going on, Renee said. Is it my fault? Caleb asked, pencil paused midair. Renee felt her chest tighten. Why would it be your fault? Caleb shrugged. Grown-ups get busy when kids mess things up. Renee reached over and gently took the pencil from his hand. Listen to me, she said softly. None of this is because of you. Not even a little. Caleb studied her face, searching for cracks. He nodded, but the question lingered behind his eyes. That night, Thomas didn't come home for dinner. He texted. Apologized. Said he was stuck downtown. Renee didn't show Caleb the message. She told him his dad would read extra pages tomorrow. Caleb pretended that was fine. At bedtime, he hesitated at the doorway again. He didn't cry this time. That was worse. Can you stay? He asked. Renee glanced down the hall toward Thomas's empty room. For a bit. She sat on the floor, back against the bed, listening to Caleb breathe. Her phone buzzed once more in her pocket, but she didn't check it. Some truths demanded patience. Others demanded courage. She didn't know yet which this one required. The next morning, Thomas looked worn in a way money couldn't buffer. His shirt was wrinkled. His voice was rough. They're expanding the investigation, he said quietly as Renee poured coffee. From the labor board? She asked. And environmental oversight, he replied. Media will follow. Renee nodded. Denise warned me. Thomas paused. You've been speaking to her again? No, Renee said. She's been speaking to me. He leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. I keep thinking there's a version of this where I made a different call. One meeting. One signature I didn't rush. Renee met his gaze. People got hurt because of those choices. I know, he said. His voice cracked slightly. He didn't hide it. I'm trying to figure out what accountability looks like now. Renee believed he meant it. That scared her more than if he didn't. Later that afternoon, Judith cornered Renee near the laundry room. This situation is becoming inappropriate, Judith said, voice clipped. In what way? Renee asked calmly. You're involved in a legal matter tied directly to this household, Judith replied. And emotionally entangled with the child. Renee folded a towel slowly. Caleb is a child. Not leverage. Judith's eyes hardened. You sleep in his room. I sleep on the floor, Renee said. Because he's afraid. Judith lowered her voice. Fear creates dependency. Dependency creates liability. Renee met her gaze without blinking. He's not a risk to manage. Judith straightened. I will be advising Mr. Whitmore accordingly. That evening, Thomas asked Renee to join him in the study. Judith sat there too. This is difficult, Thomas began. But it's necessary. Renee didn't sit. Given the scrutiny, Thomas continued, my advisors believe it would be best if your role here changed. Renee looked at Judith. Back at Thomas. Changed how? You would no longer stay overnight, Judith said. And your interactions with Caleb would be limited to scheduled hours. Caleb's name hung in the air like something fragile. Thomas cleared his throat. This isn't about what I want. Renee nodded slowly. It never is. She stood. You should tell him yourself. Thomas looked away. That night, Renee packed quietly. Not everything. Just enough. Caleb stood in the doorway watching. Are you leaving? He asked. Renee crouched in front of him. I might not stay the night for a little while. His face crumpled. Did I do something wrong? Renee shook her head, tears burning her eyes. No. But sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt even when they think they're helping. Caleb reached for her, clinging hard. Don't go. Renee held him, feeling the weight of every promise she hadn't made but had kept anyway. From the hallway, Thomas watched. He said nothing. As Renee stepped outside with her bag, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. A known number. She answered. Miss Carter, a woman's voice said. We need to talk about the night your husband died. Renee stopped walking. Because that was a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. And a truth she had buried even deeper than Thomas's. Renee didn't remember sitting down. One moment she was standing at the edge of the driveway, overnight bag slipping from her fingers. The next she was on the low stone wall near the gate, phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding so hard it blurred her hearing. I think you have the wrong number, she said. There was a pause on the line. Controlled. Professional. I don't, the woman replied. My name is Elaine Porter. I'm a senior investigator with the Insurance Review Board. We're reopening a case connected to an industrial accident from 8 years ago. Your husband, Daniel Carter, was listed as a witness. Renee closed her eyes. Daniel's name still felt unreal when spoken by someone who hadn't known him. Like a word from a language she used to speak fluently and had since forgotten. He wasn't a witness, Renee said. He died. Yes, Elaine replied. That's why we're calling. Renee's breath came shallow now. I already gave a statement. Years ago. Elaine's voice softened slightly. The original file was incomplete. New information suggests material evidence may have been withheld. Renee laughed once, sharp and humorless. From who? That's what we're trying to determine, Elaine said. But your husband's name appears in internal correspondence connected to the same corporation currently under investigation. Renee's stomach dropped. Whitmore. I don't know anything else, Renee said. I told the truth. We're not accusing you of lying, Elaine replied. But sometimes people aren't told the whole story. We'd like to meet. Renee stared back at the house. The windows glowed warm against the darkening sky. Inside, Caleb was probably asking why she'd left. Thomas was probably standing still, unsure which choice had already cost him too much. When? Renee asked. Tomorrow, Elaine said. If possible. The call ended. Renee stayed where she was long after, the gravel biting into her palms, memories rising uninvited. Daniel on the couch, boots kicked off, rubbing his temples after late shifts. The chemical smell that clung to his clothes no matter how many times she washed them. The night he came home coughing, eyes red, saying it was nothing. The night he didn't come home at all. She hadn't connected it then. She hadn't wanted to. Renee wiped her face and stood, forcing her legs to move. She hadn't driven far when she pulled over, hands shaking too badly to stay on the road. She needed air. Space. Distance from everything that was suddenly colliding. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas. She let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Renee replied honestly. There was a pause. "Where are you?" "Not far," she said. "I needed a moment." "I shouldn't have let you leave like that," Thomas said. His voice sounded stripped down, less guarded. "Judith doesn't get to decide who stays in my son's life." Renee swallowed. "It's not just about that anymore." "What do you mean?" She considered telling him everything. About Daniel. About the call. About how the past was suddenly standing shoulder to shoulder with the present. But she wasn't ready. "I'll explain," she said. "Soon." "Come back," Thomas said. Not as an order. As a request. Renee looked at the road ahead. Then at the rearview mirror. "I can't tonight," she replied. "But I'm not disappearing." Another pause. Then quietly, "Caleb's asking for you." Renee closed her eyes. "Tell him I'll see him tomorrow." Thomas hesitated. "He won't believe me unless you tell him yourself." Renee inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "Put him on." A moment passed. Then Caleb's voice, hopeful and cautious all at once. "Renee." "I'm here," she said. "I'm just staying somewhere else tonight." "Did Dad mess up?" Caleb asked. Renee smiled sadly. "Everyone messes up sometimes." "Are you coming back?" "Yes," she said, choosing the word carefully. "I promise I'll see you." Caleb was quiet. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll wait." The call ended. Renee sat there, the weight of two timelines pressing in on her. One where she had survived by staying small, quiet, unnoticed. Another where staying quiet had already cost too much. The next morning she met Elaine Porter in a modest office downtown. Elaine slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails. Reports. Names. One name appeared more than once. Thomas Whitmore. Renee's throat tightened. "These documents suggest your husband raised concerns internally weeks before his death," Elaine said. "Concerns that were escalated. And ignored." Renee stared at the page. Daniel's name. His handwriting scanned at the bottom of a memo. She had never seen it before. "They told me he died in an accident," Renee whispered. Elaine nodded. "And that may be true. But accidents are often preceded by decisions." Renee closed the folder. Because suddenly the question wasn't whether Thomas had known. It was how much. And whether loving his son meant protecting him from the truth, or preparing him for it. Renee didn't go back to the Whitmore house right away. She drove past it once, slowed instinctively, then kept going. The gates slid closed behind her like they always did, smooth and quiet, as if nothing inside ever truly changed. She needed time. Not to run. To think. Elaine's folder sat on the passenger seat, unopened now but heavy all the same. Renee felt like if she touched it again, something permanent would break open. And once it did, there would be no pretending she could step back into her old life unchanged. She stopped at a small park near the river. Sat on a bench worn smooth by years of use. Watched joggers pass, couples walk dogs, a father lift his daughter onto his shoulders. Daniel had done that once. Lifted their son, laughed when the boy squealed, promised he'd always catch him if he fell. Renee pressed her fingers into her palms until the ache grounded her. Her phone buzzed. Thomas again. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the folder. Inside were more documents than she'd expected. Incident reports flagged and dismissed. Internal emails stamped with dates that made her stomach twist. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly, not as a footnote, but as a problem. Someone who had asked too many questions. Someone who wouldn't stop documenting things. One email stood out. Asterisk if Carter keeps pushing, legal exposure increases. Recommend reassignment or suspension until review is complete. Asterisk. The response beneath it was short. Asterisk noted. We'll handle it. Asterisk. No signature. Just a system ID. Renee's hands shook. She didn't need a name to know who we met. By the time she finally drove back to the house, evening had settled in. Lights glowed in the windows. The place looked softer at night, less imposing. That almost made it worse. Thomas was waiting in the entryway. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, eyes searching her face, taking in everything she wasn't saying. You came back, he said finally. I told Caleb I would, Renee replied. Thomas nodded. He's upstairs. He didn't want to sleep. Renee set her bag down. I need to talk to you first. They went into the study. The door closed behind them, quiet but final. I met with an investigator today, Renee said. About my husband. Thomas stiffened. You never told me he worked for the company. I didn't know it mattered, Renee replied. I didn't know he'd raised concerns that were ignored. Thomas's jaw tightened. What kind of concerns? The same kind, Renee said. Chemicals. Safety shortcuts. People being told to keep quiet. Thomas turned away, pacing now. Those issues were handled by multiple departments. Daniel died 3 weeks after he filed those reports, Renee said. The room seemed to lose air. Thomas stopped pacing. What are you saying? I'm saying the company you built treated my husband like a liability, Renee replied. And I don't know whether you knew then. But I know you know now. Thomas rubbed his face slowly. I didn't know about Daniel. I swear to you. Renee studied him. But you knew about the risks. Yes, he admitted. And I believe the people who told me they were managed. Renee's voice dropped. Belief doesn't undo damage. No, Thomas said. It doesn't. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Why are you still here? Thomas asked quietly. After all this. Renee hesitated. Because of Caleb. Thomas nodded once. I was afraid you'd say that. They went upstairs together. Caleb was sitting up in bed, knees pulled to his chest. He looked relieved the moment he saw Renee. You came, he said. I said I would, Renee replied, sitting on the floor beside the bed like she always did. Caleb reached for her sleeve automatically, then paused, looked at his father. Thomas swallowed. It's okay. Caleb relaxed, but his eyes stayed on Thomas longer than usual. Are you mad? Caleb asked. Thomas shook his head. No. I'm figuring things out. Caleb considered that. Renee helps me sleep. I know, Thomas said. And I'm grateful. Those words landed heavier than an apology. Later, when Caleb was finally asleep, Thomas stayed. I'm going to cooperate fully, he said. With every investigation. I won't hide. Renee looked at him. That won't protect you. I know, Thomas replied. But it might protect him. He glanced toward the bed. Renee stood slowly. Truth has consequences. Thomas met her gaze. So does silence. As Renee stepped back into the hallway, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't unknown. It was a news alert. Major corporation under federal review following whistleblower revelations. Renee didn't need to open it. The story was moving without her now. And soon, Caleb would start asking questions neither of them could answer easily. The media didn't wait. By morning, satellite vans lined the street beyond the Whitmore gates. The quiet order of the neighborhood fractured into noise. Engines idling, reporters pacing, cameras angling for a glimpse of anything human behind glass and steel. Caleb noticed first. He stood at the window, still in pajamas, eyes narrowed. Why are there so many cars? Renee crossed the room and gently guided him back. It's not about you, she said. It had become a sentence she repeated often. It never felt fully true. Thomas was already on the phone, voice low, clipped, moving from room to room like a man trying to outpace a storm. Judith arrived before breakfast, tablet in hand, jaw set. This is escalating faster than anticipated, she said. You need to make a statement. Today. Thomas exhaled. Not before I understand the scope. Judith's eyes flicked to Renee, then away. With respect, understanding can come later. Controlling the narrative cannot. Renee said nothing. She focused on pouring cereal, on the ordinary clink of a spoon against a bowl. Caleb ate slowly, watching the adults like he was studying a foreign language. At school drop-off, whispers followed them. A woman Renee had chatted with dozens of times avoided eye contact. Another parent stared openly, then looked away when Renee noticed. Caleb tugged at her sleeve. "Did I do something bad?" Renee knelt in front of him. "No," she said, steady and clear. "But sometimes when grown-ups make mistakes, other people get loud about it." Caleb frowned. "Is Dad in trouble?" Renee hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Grown-ups handle grown-up problems," she said finally. "Your job is to be a kid." Caleb nodded, but fear lingered. He hugged her harder than usual before joining his class. Renee sat in the car for a long moment after, hands resting uselessly on the steering wheel. She didn't go straight back to the house. Instead, she drove to the address Elaine had given her. A modest office building. Neutral. Forgettable. The kind of place where truths were stored in filing cabinets instead of vaults. Elaine didn't waste time. "The federal inquiry is broader than we expected," she said, sliding another file across the desk. "And your husband's reports are now considered central." Renee opened it slowly. More emails. More names. More proof that Daniel hadn't been paranoid or reckless. He'd been methodical, careful, and ignored. "One more thing," Elaine said. "There's reason to believe he was pressured to retract his statements." Renee's heart pounded. "By who?" Elaine paused. "That's where it gets complicated." Back at the Whitmore house, Thomas stood before a wall of glass, watching the media circus unfold from a distance. He didn't turn when Renee entered. "They're calling for my resignation," he said quietly. "Some are calling for charges." Renee set her bag down. And part of me thinks that might be the right outcome," he replied. Renee studied him. "That won't undo what happened." "I know," Thomas said. "But it might stop it from happening again." She considered that. "What about Caleb?" Thomas closed his eyes. "That's the part one can't solve." That night, Caleb didn't want to sleep. He sat upright, twisting the edge of his blanket, eyes darting every time a car passed outside. "They were talking about you at school," he said softly. Renee felt something tighten in her chest. "What did they say?" "That my dad hurts people," Caleb whispered. "Is that true?" Renee looked at Thomas, who stood frozen in the doorway, caught between listening and intervening. She chose her words carefully. "Your dad made decisions that affected people," she said. "Some of them were bad. But hurting people was never his goal." Caleb stared at the floor. "Does that make him bad?" Thomas stepped forward. "No," he said. His voice shook. "It makes me responsible." Caleb looked up, surprised. "I'm going to fix what I can," Thomas continued. "And I'm going to tell the truth even when it's hard." Caleb nodded, slowly processing. "Okay." Renee sat on the floor as usual. Caleb lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. His hand found her sleeve, held on. Later, when the house was quiet, Renee checked her phone. A new message waited. "We found evidence your husband was offered a settlement to stay quiet. It was declined. Renee's breath caught. Another message followed seconds later. The offer came from a discretionary fund authorized at the executive level. Renee stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. Because suddenly the question wasn't just what Thomas knew. It was what he'd been willing to pay to keep the truth buried. Renee didn't confront Thomas right away. She lay awake on the floor beside Caleb's bed, staring at the faint crack of light under the door. Caleb slept fitfully, his breathing uneven, fingers still curled into the fabric of her sleeve. Every time he shifted, Renee felt it like a warning. The messages replayed in her mind. A settlement to stay quiet. Declined. Authorized at the executive level. She didn't know what hurt more, that someone had tried to buy Daniel's silence, or that he'd refused and paid for it anyway. By morning the house felt different. Tighter. Like every wall had leaned in overnight. Thomas was already up, jacket on, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call when he saw her. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," Renee replied. They stood there, the space between them full of things unsaid. "I need to ask you something," Renee said. "And I need you to answer without protecting yourself." Thomas's jaw set. "Okay. Was there ever a settlement offered to my husband?" she asked. The question landed cleanly. No room to dodge. Thomas didn't answer immediately. He walked to the counter, set his phone down carefully, like it might shatter if handled wrong. "There were discussions," he said finally, "about mitigating exposure." Renee felt the room tilt. "That's not an answer." Thomas exhaled. "Yes," he said. "There was an offer." Her throat tightened. "And you approved it?" Thomas met her eyes. "I approved a discretionary fund allocation. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his story." "But you knew what it was for," Renee said. "Yes." The word hung there, heavy and undeniable. Renee nodded slowly, absorbing it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. That scared Thomas more than anger would have. "He said no," Renee said. "He came home that night and told me he wouldn't take blood money. Those were his words." Thomas closed his eyes. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Renee replied. Silence followed. Not explosive. Final. Caleb's door creaked open behind them. "Are you fighting?" he asked, voice small. Renee turned immediately. "No," she said. "We're talking." Thomas knelt in front of his son. "Hey," he said gently. "I'm going to be busy today. But I'll be back." Caleb studied his face. "For real?" "For real," Thomas said. Caleb nodded, then looked at Renee. "You're staying?" Renee hesitated just a fraction too long. "I'm here right now," she said. It was the most honest answer she could give. After Caleb left for school, the lawyers arrived. They filled the study with quiet urgency. Spoke in low voices about timelines and cooperation and optics. Renee stayed out of it, folding laundry she didn't need to fold, listening without trying to. At one point, Judith pulled Thomas aside. Renee caught fragments. Voluntary resignation could mitigate. Public perception. Custody implications. That last phrase made Renee's hands still. Custody. That afternoon Elaine called. "The settlement authorization is traceable," she said. "Not directly to you, but close enough that it will matter." Renee closed her eyes. "What happens next?" Elaine paused. "Your testimony will carry weight. Especially now." Renee thought of Caleb. Of his hand in hers. Of the way he waited. "I won't lie," she said. "But I won't weaponize the truth either." "That may not be your choice much longer," Elaine replied. When Renee returned to the house, Thomas was alone in the living room, staring at nothing. "They're suggesting I step down," he said without looking up. Renee set her bag down. And I think I will," he replied. "Not as a strategy. As a line." She studied him. "That won't make this easier." "I know," Thomas said. "But maybe it makes it cleaner." Renee considered that. "Clean isn't the same as right." Thomas nodded. "I'm learning that." That night, Caleb refused to let go. He clung to Renee as she sat on the floor, his fear quiet but persistent. "Are you leaving?" he asked. Renee swallowed. "I don't know yet." Caleb's lip trembled. "Everyone leaves." Thomas stepped in, voice steady but strained. "Not everyone." Caleb looked between them. "Promise?" Thomas hesitated. Then said, "I promise I'll tell the truth. Even if it costs me." Caleb considered that like a bargain. "Okay." Later, after Caleb slept, Renee stood at the window watching the dark. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Elaine. *, the board wants to hear from you tomorrow. Off the record. Before charges are finalized. *. Renee closed her eyes. Because tomorrow silence would no longer be neutral. And whatever she chose to say would redraw the lives of everyone in that house. Renee dressed carefully the next morning. Not formally. Not defensively. She chose simple clothes, clean lines, nothing that asked for sympathy or suggested defiance. She wanted to walk into the room as herself, not as a symbol. Caleb watched from the doorway while she tied her shoes. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I have a meeting," Renee said. "A hard one." Caleb nodded like he understood more than he should. "Will you come back?" Renee met his eyes. "Yes." Thomas stood a few steps behind Caleb, hands in his pockets. He hadn't slept. It showed. "I'll drive you," he said. Renee hesitated. "That might complicate things." Thomas nodded. "Then I'll wait." The board meeting took place in a downtown office tower that smelled like polished wood and recycled air. Elaine met Renee in the lobby and led her upstairs. No reporters. No cameras. Just quiet hallways and closed doors. Inside the room sat 6 people. Men and women in tailored suits. Some faces neutral. Some guarded. Elaine made introductions. Then stepped back. Renee took a seat. "We appreciate you coming," one of them began. "We understand this isn't easy." Renee didn't respond. She waited. They asked about Daniel first. How long he'd worked there. What he'd told her at home. How he'd changed in the weeks before his death. Renee answered slowly, carefully, letting silence do some of the work. "He stopped sleeping," she said at one point. "Not because he was scared. Because he was angry." The board members shifted. "He believed someone would get killed if nothing changed," Renee continued. "He wasn't dramatic. He documented everything." "Did he feel threatened?" someone asked. Renee paused. "He felt dismissed." That landed harder than any accusation. They asked about the settlement next. Renee told them what Daniel had said when he refused it. About dignity. About not teaching their son that silence could be bought. "He knew saying no would make things harder," Renee said. "He just didn't think it would make things fatal." No one interrupted. When they finally asked about Thomas, the room tightened. Renee took a breath. "I believe Thomas Whitmore convinced himself he was insulated from consequences. That layers of people and policies would handle the damage for him." She met their eyes. "But insulation is a choice. And so is accountability." When it was over, Elaine walked Renee back to the elevator. "You didn't protect him," Elaine said. "But you didn't destroy him either." "I told the truth," Renee replied. Outside, Thomas waited in his car across the street. He stepped out when he saw her. "How bad was it?" he asked. Renee studied him. "It depends on what you're willing to lose." Thomas nodded slowly. "I resigned this morning." Renee absorbed that. "That won't stop what's coming." "I know," he said. "But it stops me from pretending I'm still in control." They drove back in silence. At the house, Judith waited. "They'll be contacting you directly," she told Thomas. "And child services may request an evaluation." Thomas stiffened. "For what reason?" "High-profile instability," Judith replied. "And concern over emotional dependency." Caleb's name wasn't said. It didn't need to be. That night, Caleb sensed the shift. He ate quietly. Watched Thomas more than his food. When bedtime came, he hesitated. "Can Renee still stay?" he asked. Thomas looked at Renee. Really looked. "I can't promise anything I don't have the right to give," he said carefully. "But I want you to feel safe." Caleb's eyes filled. "She makes me feel safe." Thomas swallowed. "I know." Renee sat on the floor, the space familiar now. Caleb curled toward her, but his sleep was shallow. Later, Thomas spoke quietly from the doorway. "If they decide she's a liability," he said, "they'll push her out." Renee didn't look up. "Then I'll go." Thomas's voice cracked. "And Caleb?" Renee closed her eyes. "He'll survive. Kids do. But they remember who stayed honest." Thomas stepped back, the weight of that settling into him. Renee's phone buzzed. A message from Elaine. * formal charges are likely. And Thomas's cooperation will be part of the record. *. Renee stared at the screen, then at the sleeping child beside her. Tomorrow the consequences would become public. And whatever happened next, there would be no pretending this was just a job anymore. The news broke before dawn. Renee heard it before she saw it. Thomas's phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand in the guest room where she hadn't quite unpacked, hadn't quite left. The low murmur of a reporter's voice drifted up from the television downstairs, Judith's unmistakable cadence cutting in and out. She sat up slowly, already knowing. Formal charges. Executive negligence. Failure to disclose known risks. She didn't need the details yet. The weight of it pressed into her chest all the same. Caleb came down the stairs rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in uneven directions. He froze when he saw the TV. Thomas crossed the room in 2 strides and turned it off. "Hey," he said gently. "Breakfast first." Caleb's gaze stayed fixed on the dark screen. "Is that about you?" Thomas didn't lie. "Yes." Caleb swallowed. "Are you going to jail?" The question landed hard and simple. "I don't know," Thomas said. "But I'm talking to people who can help me do the right thing." Caleb nodded slowly, like he was filing the answer away for later when he'd need it again. Renee stayed quiet. This was Thomas's moment to show up or not. At school drop-off, 2 parents whispered openly. One woman stared at Renee with open curiosity, not bothering to hide it this time. Caleb's teacher pulled Renee aside. "He seems distracted," she said gently. "If there's anything we should know." "There is," Renee replied. "And we're handling it." The teacher nodded, respectful but concerned. By midday, child services called. Not accusing. Assessing. Scheduling. Thomas took the call in the study, door half closed. Renee heard his voice rise once. Then steady again. When he emerged, his face was pale. "They want to speak with Caleb," he said. "And with you." Renee nodded. "That was coming." "They're questioning your role here," Thomas continued. "Your sleeping arrangement. Your influence." Renee's jaw tightened. "I've been careful." "I know," Thomas said. "But careful doesn't always look clean on paper." That afternoon, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. The evaluator was younger than Renee expected. "Come." Neutral. She introduced herself and knelt to Caleb's level. They talked in the living room. About school. About his favorite food. About who helped him feel safe. Caleb answered honestly. "Renee," he said when asked. The evaluator made a note. Thomas watched, jaw tight, hands clenched behind his back. When it was over, the woman stood. "We'll be in touch." After she left, the house felt hollowed out. Caleb went upstairs without being told. Renee followed. He sat on his bed, shoulders slumped. "Did I say the wrong thing?" Renee sat on the floor. "You told the truth." Caleb's eyes filled. "Will they make you leave?" Renee hesitated. "Too long." Caleb noticed. "Everyone leaves," he whispered. Thomas appeared in the doorway. He knelt in front of his son. "Listen to me," he said, voice firm but shaking. "What's happening is my responsibility. Not yours. Not Renee's." Caleb looked between them. "So she can stay?" Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. "If they make you choose," he said to Renee quietly, "choose yourself." Renee felt the sting of that. "That's not what he needs." "That's what he needs to see," Thomas replied. "That you don't disappear because of me." That night, Renee packed again. Not to leave immediately. To be ready. She folded clothes slowly, deliberately, each movement a decision. Caleb hovered in the doorway. "You're packing," he said. "Just in case," Renee replied. Caleb climbed onto the bed and hugged his knees. "I don't like just in case." Renee sat beside him. "Neither do I." Her phone buzzed. "Elaine. Asterisk public arraignment scheduled. Media will be aggressive. You may be contacted. Asterisk." Renee typed back one word. "Understood." She looked at Caleb, memorizing the way his face softened when he leaned against her. Because tomorrow the world would see Thomas Whitmore as a headline. But tonight, all that mattered was whether a child would wake up feeling abandoned. And Renee wasn't ready to let that happen without a fight. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Renee arrived. Cameras. Microphones. People shouting questions that weren't really questions at all. Thomas stepped out of the car beside her, shoulders squared, face drawn. He looked older than he had a month ago. Lighter, somehow, without the weight of pretending. "Stay back," one of his attorneys said. "You don't need to be here." Renee shook her head. "I do." Inside, the air was cool and impersonal. Wood benches. Pale walls. The hum of quiet conversations layered with tension. Renee sat behind Thomas, close enough to hear his breathing. The charges were read. Carefully. Formally. Negligence. Failure to disclose. Endangerment. Thomas didn't flinch. When the judge asked how he pleaded, Thomas spoke clearly. Not guilty, with full cooperation. The words carried. Some reporters scribbled faster. Outside, it exploded again. Questions flew. Accusations. Someone shouted Renee's name. She kept her head down. Back at the house, Caleb waited with a neighbor, fingers twisting in his shirt. "Is Dad in trouble?" he asked as soon as Renee stepped inside. "Yes," Renee said. "But he's facing it." Caleb nodded. "Okay." That afternoon, Child Services returned. This time they didn't sit. They explained options. Temporary arrangements. Monitoring. The word removal wasn't used, but it hovered close enough to feel. Caleb clung to Renee's hand. The evaluator looked between them. "We're concerned about dependency." Renee took a breath. "He's experienced loss. Attachment isn't pathology." The evaluator nodded slowly. "True. But boundaries matter." Thomas stepped forward. "Then set them with me." They turned to him. "I failed to be present," he said. "I won't fail to take responsibility now. If someone needs to leave, it should be me." Silence followed. The evaluator studied him. "You're suggesting you step back?" "I'm suggesting I don't make my son choose between safety and loyalty," Thomas replied. Renee's chest tightened. That night, Caleb sat between them on the couch. "Am I going somewhere?" he asked. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're staying here." Caleb looked at Renee. "Are you?" Renee swallowed. "I don't know yet." Caleb leaned into her side. "I want things to be like before." Renee closed her eyes. "Before was hurting you." Caleb frowned. "But you were here." Thomas watched them, something resolute settling in his expression. Later, after Caleb slept, Thomas found Renee in the kitchen. "I'm arranging a temporary guardianship," he said. "If things escalate." Renee turned slowly. "With who?" "With my sister," Thomas replied. "She lives nearby. She's steady. And she knows you." Renee nodded. "That's responsible." "And if they say you can't stay," Thomas continued, "I want Caleb to know it wasn't abandonment." Renee's voice was quiet. "He'll still feel it that way." "I know," Thomas said. "But maybe less so if we're honest." Renee's phone buzzed. A message from Elaine. There's pressure to frame you as complicit. Be careful. Renee stared at the screen. Because suddenly staying might hurt Caleb. But leaving might break him. And the system wasn't interested in which choice carried the least pain. Only in which one looked cleanest on paper. The house felt suspended in time the morning after the arraignment. No reporters had made it past the gates yet, but the air still carried that familiar pressure, like something heavy waiting just out of sight. Renee woke before anyone else and sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she barely touched. She replayed the message from Elaine again. There's pressure to frame you as complicit. Complicit. The word clung to her skin. If that happened, she wouldn't just lose her place in the house. She'd lose credibility. Her ability to protect Caleb from a distance. Her chance to be believed about Daniel. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Caleb patted in, rubbing his eyes. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, Renee said. He climbed into the chair beside her. I had a bad dream. About what? Caleb shrugged. Everyone talking at once. Renee reached for his hand. He held on tightly. Thomas appeared a few minutes later, tie already on, expression resolved in a way that felt new. Not defensive. Decided. I spoke to my sister, he said. She's coming by today. Caleb looked up. Aunt Lila? Yes, Thomas said. Just to visit. Caleb nodded, but his grip on Renee tightened. By late morning, a black sedan pulled into the driveway again. This time it wasn't child services. Two investigators stepped out. One male, one female. Federal. They asked to speak with Renee privately. Thomas started to follow. The woman held up a hand. Just her. They sat in the study. Miss Carter, the man began, we're assessing potential witness coordination. Renee felt her spine straighten. I've told the truth. We're not questioning that, the woman said. But proximity creates perception. You think I'm here to influence testimony? Renee asked. We think others might claim that, the man replied. Renee took a breath. Then claim it. I won't change my story to look better. They exchanged a glance. That may not protect you, the woman said. I know, Renee replied. But it protects my son's memory. They left without resolution. Aunt Lila arrived shortly after. Warm. Direct. She hugged Renee without asking permission. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For everything. They all sat together for lunch. Conversation careful but kind. Caleb leaned against Renee the entire time. That afternoon, Thomas asked Renee to walk with him in the garden. I need you to hear this from me, he said. If it comes down to it, I'll say you overstepped. That you didn't know everything. Renee stopped walking. You'd lie. I'd protect my son, Thomas said. Renee's voice was steady. By making me the problem? Thomas closed his eyes. By keeping you out of the line of fire. Renee shook her head. That fire already burned my husband. They stood there, the space between them finally irreconcilable. That evening Renee packed fully. Not in secret. Not in anger. Caleb watched, silent tears slipping down his face. Are you going forever? He asked. Renee knelt in front of him. No. But I need to leave so the grown-ups can do what they have to do. Caleb shook his head. I don't want clean paper. I want you. Renee hugged him tightly, breathing him in. I'll still show up. Just differently. Thomas stood in the doorway, eyes wet. I'm sorry, he said. So am I, Renee replied. She left just after sunset. From the car, she watched the house recede in the mirror. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. Elaine. Asterisk your testimony stands. They're backing off the complicit angle for now. Asterisk. Renee exhaled slowly. Because she had lost her place in that house. But she hadn't lost her voice. And the truth, finally, was no longer sleeping on the floor. Time changed the noise first. The cameras left. The vans disappeared. Headlines shortened, then slid off the front pages altogether. What remained were court dates, therapy appointments, school drop-offs, and long stretches of quiet that felt unfamiliar after months of pressure. Renee rented a small apartment 15 minutes away. Nothing fancy. Clean. Sunlight in the mornings. She worked 2 jobs again, one at a community center, one cleaning offices at night. The work grounded her. Reminded her who she was before everything collided. She didn't disappear. She picked Caleb up from school twice a week, exactly as approved. Sat on the same bench near the playground. Helped with homework. Listened more than she spoke. At first, Caleb waited for her to come back to the house. Then he stopped asking. Instead, he started telling her things. About school. About therapy sessions he didn't hate as much as he thought he would. About how his dad cooked badly but tried anyway. Thomas changed too. He testified. Publicly. Fully. He didn't dodge questions. Didn't soften language. When asked what he knew and when he answered plainly. The company settled multiple cases. Safety protocols were overhauled. He was barred from executive leadership indefinitely. He accepted it without appeal. Renee watched the testimony online, sitting alone on her couch, hands folded in her lap. When Thomas spoke about responsibility, he didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Afterward, he texted once. Thank you for telling the truth. She didn't respond right away. Weeks later, they met for coffee. Neutral ground. No lawyers. No urgency. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Thomas said. I'm asking for clarity. Renee stirred her cup slowly. About what? About us, he said. And about him. Renee looked out the window. People passed by, living ordinary lives untouched by corporate hearings or whispered settlements. You can't rebuild trust by wanting it, she said. You rebuild it by staying put when it's inconvenient. Thomas nodded. I know. He stayed. Not romantically. Not dramatically. He showed up to parent-teacher meetings. To therapy sessions. To awkward dinners with his sister present because that was the agreement. He stopped trying to manage outcomes and started listening to consequences. Caleb noticed. One afternoon, as Renee walked him back to his aunt's car, he looked up at her. You and Dad talk different now, he said. How so? Slower, Caleb replied. Like you're not scared to mess up. Renee smiled. That's because messing up isn't the worst thing anymore. Months passed. The investigation closed. Charges were reduced but not erased. Accountability stuck. So did the work. One evening, Thomas asked Renee to walk with him along the river. Same path where joggers passed, dogs pulled at leashes, life continued without spectacle. I'm not the man I was, Thomas said. Renee nodded. I know. I don't want to be, he added. They stopped near the water. I won't ask you to move back, Thomas said. I won't ask you to forgive what shouldn't be rushed. But I will ask you this. He took a breath. Would you consider building something honest with me? Slowly. In full view of the truth. Renee studied him for a long moment. You don't get to choose me because I stayed when it was ugly, she said. You choose me only if you're willing to be accountable when it's quiet. Thomas met her gaze. That's the only way I know how now. She didn't answer right away. The answer came weeks later in a small moment that didn't feel cinematic at all. Caleb had a school performance. He froze halfway through his lines. Panic rose. The room waited. Thomas didn't rush the stage. He stayed seated. Renee didn't either. She caught Caleb's eye and nodded once. Not rescue. Permission. Caleb took a breath and finished. Afterward, as they walked to the car, he slipped his hand into both of theirs. Not choosing. Belonging. That night, Thomas asked again. No ring yet. No speech. Just certainty. Renee said yes. Not to wealth. Not to redemption. To responsibility. To truth. To choosing each other with eyes open. They married quietly the following spring. No press. No spectacle. Just family, a few friends, and a child who smiled the entire time because no one left. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about truth, accountability, or the quiet power of staying when it's hard, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this matter because they remind us that love isn't proven by comfort, but by courage. And if you've ever had to choose honesty over ease, you're not alone.